Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the third episode of Peas in a Pod. Today, we're speaking about how urban planning has become stagnant in driving transformation and innovation, looking at the potential of low-cost innovation in housing. Today, you with your favorite host, Mapula Mahale, but I also go by the name of Maps. And today, we're joined by a vet student who I really love and adore. We're joined by Regli Munya, who is doing his master's in social work and is one of three directors of an NGO called YSTEM. Welcome, Regli, to our podcast.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mapula, for having me. It's a great opportunity to be on your platform today. So I'll be looking forward to be learning from these insights. Thanks.
Okay, so just to start off, can you please tell us more about yourself, why you went into social work, and why you decided to open an NGO?
Well, that's a good question. I'm glad it's not one of those questions where they ask you tell us about yourself, but behind my profession. So thank you for that. Social work is one of the noble degrees I'd like to believe. It's one of those implementing degrees in the helping profession because of in all the helping professions, social work is the only one in its values and ethics that has social justice. So half of the time it wants you to be on your toes, and there's a lot of social injustices in our society. You see it in structures, you see it in systems such as schools, you see it in inclusions, you see it in diversity or lack of diversity rather. So social work became a good entrant for me, particularly in the public sector and also maybe sipping into private to see how can in the society key role players such as your private sector, such as your public sector, such as your unions, such as you name it, they become key role players in influencing how the society ought to look like. So I think in a nutshell, that is one of the reasons as to why I embarked on a master's in social work, to see the nuances that we do not look or that even policies do not address. That, when we say that social workers are the ones that can speak out when they witness a social injustice, those are the nuances that you identify, whether in policies, whether in implementing of services, or you name it. So I think that is one of the reasons as to why I did social work. Thank you for that question.
Okay, and then why did you open an NGO? What inspired the NGO, and what is the NGO about?
So NGOs, I mean, if ever I could tilt back to what I said earlier on, that we have key role players in the society, right? Being private, being public as well, being NGOs, because of NGO play crucial role in the society, particularly when you help government where to some extent is lacking, to implement their policies, to implement their service delivery, or sometimes, to influence a certain kind of aspect that warrants the society to, see their rights implemented. So I think coming with an NGO also that also look at youth in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. It's one of the things that you realize that when we enter into the fourth industrial revolution, as per academic, arguments, you realize that some of the skills that maybe we South Africans also need, at a national level or at a local level, when I look at it, the continent, it's those skills that has to do with such wide STEM curriculum. Because of, you look at, if ever we were to compare ourselves with other economies that are developing, you see that curriculum plays eminence. If ever you want to foster a certain kind of behavior, there has to be a form of a strategy that comes. And in the public sector, it would become what? Become a curriculum. So I think when I became a part of this NGO, the idea rather was to be at grassroots level so that you can find ways, like I said, those nuances to address when it comes to like the incapacities of our government. So when you look at why STEM education, you look at how you can prepare, matriculants or from rather grade 10 to grade 12 for university, and rather tailoring their outlook as to how their life should be. If ever they have the resources and the capacity and they have all the support that they need, then what are the chances that they can come at vets as well and do, why STEM influence or motivated curriculum, so that also where there's lack of need when it comes to critical skills, we do have that. And also maybe decentralize the myth around maths, scaring people around maths. There's different ways in which mathematics could be understood. When you look at best practices in other countries, you actually realize that, mathematics is decentralized. They use their own languages to understand the mathematical equations. Look at South Korea, how it is able to use the method of translating books such as Shakespeare to Korean language. It enforces them to try and understand, or rather have an idea of what literature ought to look like. And now, when you come to a South African perspective, you realize that, the book is literature heavy to some extent, and now you're being tested at that at matric level. When you try to see how the nuances are affecting those in which are supposed to be learning from this curriculum. So I think in a nutshell, I'd pause there, but I think the overarching theme is that I became part of an NGO because of I'd like to also focus on the nuances that this, the government is failing to do, or how we can help and support the government with also the aid of the private sector and other various role players in the society. Thank you.
I believe you raised some very interesting points. And one of the points that actually stood out to me is that as a social worker, you're an advocate for social justice. And particularly for me as a town planner, I think those are some of the attributes that I should be having as a town planner, because you're also an advocate for the poor and the marginalized, right? And you spoke about making sure that there's policies that are very progressive in driving transformation, and how your NGO seeks to tailor and grow the youth into understanding that there's different streams that speak to science and speak to innovation. So I just want to ask, so with the growth of urbanization in our urban spaces, we see that there's also a rapid growth in informal settlements. So as a vet student and someone who lives within the city, I would think that you are aware of a settlement that's called Begezela within close proximities to Newtown. What are your views of the living conditions of the settlement, and what does it say to you in terms of the housing policy that South Africa has and the city has in terms of providing inclusive housing spaces for people?
Well, that's a good question. A very critical one, rather, but I hope I will be able to gather it all. I'll just ask follow-up questions pending that. But one, what does it say when people are trying to become closer to the city? There's
Yeah.
reasons. I'll keep on tilting back to the term nuances. There are nuances as to why people want to be at a particular place, and all of them at particular numbers. I think it's back to social sciences 101, the movement of people being influenced by opportunities or the inavailabilities of things to do back where they are, geography, right? So I think when it comes to that, we'll see the migration, and it's something that is constantly going to be happening because of, you see how the city is becoming the central point as to where the resources are, which municipalities have the biggest budgets in the land. So when we look at policy at a policy level, one, perhaps there isn't good state preparedness. I mean, if ever you're going to be an engine, surely there's form of risk management that you'd like to do. And surely if ever you are a municipality, or rather a government or a policy, that should be talking about people and bearing in mind that people are likely to come from various places to come and maybe implement work or seek employment, or you name it, based on how people influence life. Then perhaps when social ills such as the situation at Begezela start emerging, because of at this particular moment, those houses there, it's people's efforts of trying to live closer to the city. It becomes a settlement, and at a particular moment, it becomes not even registered. There isn't any going to be any refusal collecting there. There isn't going to be even access to either your street lights or anything, because of basically it is under the assumption in open codes you've put yourself there basically. And anytime how the policies around removing people in places in which they're not supposed to be,
Yeah.
what would take place? I mean, I think when you look at also, they're experiencing something like that, where you find people want to use that land for different purposes, and therefore those people should be removed. What I'm trying to say is that at a policy level, perhaps readiness it's something that should be included. One of the unintended consequences when you're saying that you are giving people housing, where are you giving them? And also, are you looking at the emerging trends that are happening in your own country? So I think it is something that has to be strategic at a policy level if ever we are going to be having people at grassroots level, like you yourself as a town planner, who you would have understood at, excuse me, at a grassroots level how things are, then how they ought to be translated. So I think if ever I could ask if ever I answered your question, all of it, or if ever there's any follow up that you'd like to make based on my response just now. Thank you.
Um, you did answer the question, and it has me thinking about the previous episode. So I guess because is someone who's in the construction industry, and they spoke about how even if we as a general public or we as academics would want to assist people in spaces such as Begezela by teaching them and showing them how to build functional homes through informal settlements, it will be very difficult considering that there's a red tape between what type of development takes place in certain areas. And considering that you said that the space is not recognized, and obviously issues of land use also play a role, considering that the settlement is very close to a railway station. How do you then think then we should tackle the issue of um, the residents in Begazetta, considering how vulnerable they are, especially right now with issues arising with load shedding and water shortages, meaning that firstly, they're already living in a vulnerable state. And obviously, the sanitation systems are probably not the best right now. But how do you make sure that even in those spaces, they're able to be recognized and we create sustainable spaces that they can temporarily live in, considering that the housing issue is still ongoing and the government has fully shown that they do not have the capacity to be building housing.
Well, thank you for that question. I mean, we spoke at length around policies and around implementing service delivery, but also sometimes you ask yourself, who is the development happening to? What I'm trying to say is that, we should be bridging the gap between service users and the government. We only go and vote. Oh, there's certain things that happen, but at a particular level, there's that loss of touch with reality that each and every day people, influence life. So the situation at Begezela, it is very, very like it. Excuse me, can I please take this? I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Thank you for that. I just had a social challenge, but I'm ready to get back. Could you please give me your question again?
I asked, how do you make sure that we capacitate the people in Megazilla to build more functional spaces for themselves? Because currently, the government has clearly shown that it doesn't have the finances to be building more housing, right? Meaning that there'll be a bigger growth in these slums, considering that COVID happened and many people lost their jobs. So, meaning that people must find creative ways to create homes out of these slums. So, how do you then capacitate them to make sure that they live in livable environments that are functional, considering load shedding and water shedding that is currently taking place and the type of sanitation systems that they have within these spaces?
Thank you for that. Like I said, bridging the gap between service users and the government. I mean, you look at Johannesburg, right? There's often an argument that there's a huge backlog, particularly when it comes to housing. When we look at the reality of what it is, of what is currently happening contemporarily, so, and especially take into consideration what is happening at Begezela, you realize that, the lack of implementation of policies, the lack of managerial skills of people at a government level, how it's affecting the people at grassroots level. That is my chat, that, there is that loss of touch between the people influencing life every day, the people who assumed that constitutionally so their rights are enshrined in a certain bill. However, when it comes to service delivery, they're not getting it. Look at how now the ripple effect of, you name it, social ills such as corruption or lack of managerial skills of people that are in government are implementing into. There is research that argues that, it isn't sustainable that half of the time our government relies on what on a on a tender approach towards service delivery, that for every service there has to be an issue out of a tender, or for every service requirement there has to be an issuing of a program. So now you realize that when those things are affected by nuances when it comes to management, such as your corruption or lack of good skills when it comes to are running or implementing what policies ought to look like, then we are becoming such challenges. I mean, when you look at a global perspective, just by only an entrance into the Constitution of South Africa as a point of departure, it is often argued that it is the most eminent one that relates to the human development, that relates to people who come from being colonized, people who come from an apartheid era, and now it is paved for the way. This is the people that are implementing that. So I think for me, I don't know if ever it would be addressing the immediate issue, but saying that, when we look at where services such as housing should be coming from, bearing in mind contemporary issues such as migration that relates to slums in Johannesburg, and also ultimately people having social ills because of all of them are competing for limited resources. Let us also go back and not wipe only on the floor, but try to find where the leak is. The leak is in corruption. The leak is in lack of good management when it comes to management of municipalities or service delivery. You look at the role of politics, something that we are scared to touch, into service delivery. How Look at what is happening in Johannesburg. It is often argued that when we are in colluding governments, and it is very unsustainable, because of half of the time there's an election of a new mayor, a new office, because of the portfolios change, bearing in mind that those are political positions and not necessarily positions that are obtained maybe sometimes through a technical competency of some sort. We look at those nuances when it comes to service delivery. That is why when now we're seeing what is happening at Begezela, we're feeling it at a personal level, the load shedding, the lack of being able to run your own service. You try and relate as to how is this that is happening. Is it the housing issue? If ever yes, it's the housing issue. Where is this happening? Under this particular region, under which particular municipality, under what kind of leadership, under what nuances that are happening in those managerial positions, with policies that are ready to see that we are a developing country, with policies that it is very complex. Hence I'm saying, I'd like to say that it wouldn't make sense for us to say, oh, let us go donate, or let us remember the kindness to help one another, because of that is not preparing people for success or empowering people to be able to do for themselves. There's often argument that we often go sometimes to people and build them houses, but sometimes we lack the knowledge that people sometimes want to be capacitated with skills so that they can earn a form of a salary, so that they can entirely now build themselves houses. Because of also, when you look at how life sometimes unfolds, the form of way in which people actualize life is different. We shouldn't be taking a single approach towards solving issues by just only giving and donating and partnering with certain corporations to go and donate there, because and then assume that that is a way of living. It isn't. It's a social injustice that people are experiencing load shedding, and today in Johannesburg it's very cold. It's a social injustice that there'll be a fire breakage because of there's 50 people living in a place that was supposed to be, it's supposed to maybe be a place that can only house 10 people, but because of these modalities of use of energy to try and sustain life, affects almost everyone. So I think in summatively, if I may try to come back to the point, is to say that we should be bridging the gap between the service users, which is your normal South Africans like you and I, and service providers. Those are the people who are in parliament, and in their hierarchies of going down to your ministers, going down to your members of the executive councils, to your mayors. It goes down to your councillors. It goes down. It's that hierarchy that when it comes to service delivery, we ought to make sure that also the people that are implementing these are people that are also equipped enough, so that when we look at the social ills, we know that the social ills are not entirely because of the government is not doing what they are trying to do, but the social ills are as a result of people influencing life. Thank you. Thank you so
This
much.
is this is really interesting because the previous interviews have also highlighted the same sentiments that you share. That yes, South Africa might have like progressive policies, but to a certain degree, those policies were unrealistic because there was never a plan on how they're going to realize them. And also, they spoke about how there's potentially, not even potentially, there's a lack of governance within South Africa that actually perpetuates poverty and the growth of inequality within South Africa. And I just want to understand this from a social work point of view. What implications does the growth of a child in these settlements do to them in as they grow older? What social issues do they experience because of growing within a space that is not fully conducive, fully functional? And what implications do these people encounter usually?
That's a great question, and I'm becoming excited in answering this because of sometimes we need to be having this conversation, drawing to reality of what is currently happening. And unfortunately, I would like to make use of the example of Thabo Beste. Thabo Beste, when we is it Thabo? They use the name Thabo Beste, right? Nandi
Yes.
Pamakutumanas, exactly. You, there's that psychosocial template that people go through when we're killed from a social work perspective. We believe that almost everyone who is living is supposed to go through a psychosocial template when they grow. But this psychosocial template is influenced by a variety of things. It's influenced by the environment in which you live in. It is influenced by people that you interact with. It's influenced by the family itself that you come from. It is influenced by the schools that you go to. So you ask a very relevant question as to what are the implications towards growth because of each environment. There's that implication of nurture versus nature. I can nurture you, try to nurture you as a mom, but also the environment will come to tilt something when it comes to growth. For example, you find out that you grow in an area such as any form of a settlement where there isn't to some extent a form of progress, or there isn't some extent, you know, good ways of living in that environment. You adjust one thing about the resilience of human beings, that they do definitely adjust, but the system influences who they are and who they ought to become. You look at, for instance, situations such as Begezela. You look at the nuances that influence people, that influence or come out of how people live there. Like I've alluded, that you'll find maybe 50 people living in an environment that only 10 people were supposed to be living there. you Families in raising children, some of the social ills that you find is that some of these men or some of these mothers, let me also be neutral in my approach towards the language, that they use recreational well, drugs, let me, for lack of a better word, they
Yeah.
use the recreational drugs such as marijuana. So the use of marijuana, you find out that they use it in front of their kids because of they stay in a settlement. There isn't anywhere to some extent where they'll be observant that they have a child, and they stay in such enclosed spaces. And one thing that also geography one-on-one argues is that in environments where there is poverty, in environments where there is lack of job opportunity, the only thing that human beings are capable of doing, or rather ought to do, for recreation is having sex. So they reproduce in a
Mhm.
space of, in closer proximities, where while the other children grow, they get to witness their parents maybe having sex. These implications of growing up in environments that are congested, where even the parents themselves who are trying to make a living are working on themselves, but you find that nature precedes where there's so much pivoting of sex. So there are huge implications for that. The child is born. Are the parents, they themselves, staying there, having IDs? Are they registered with the Home Affairs? Are they aware that the child is supposed to be registered with the Home Affairs? Because also when you go to this settlement, you find that there are numbers of children who don't have birth certificate or IDs because of, parents are are unaware of such things. You find children entering the birth registry and home affairs very late. There is a lot of issues that come into play in growing up in environments that do not propel you for success. The same way we are saying that the psychosocial template at the social profession level warrants people to go through stages, and each stage is influenced by where you go to school, who you stay around, and then kind of environment in which you wake up. So you stay in Johannesburg, you are a child. When you just wake up and open your eyes, it's just someone maybe selling a scope, or all the people drinking alcohol. Such nuances, implications to the child is that you wake up. This is the living. You learn on the go. It's like learning on the job at a higher level. If I use it, that the children also are capable of taking such a template where the environment propels who you become. There is a relationship, or there is a correlation between growing in an environment that is violent versus you. We've also seen it in gender-based violence cases where people who sometimes come and say, "My father used to be an abuser, and that's why I'm an abuser today." Those are the implication of growing in such environments where there is a lack of services, there is frustrations that come with social ills such as unemployment, the excessive use of alcohol. So when I try to narrow it down is to how you phrased your question, which I've liked how you put that, the implication rather on someone growing up under this environments. We've spoken about at a professional level that we look at a systematic view. We call it the systems theory towards viewing a client, and a client can be a child. So based on where the child goes to school, who the child go with, their health status, because of also we live in a country where there's high reporting of children being born with HIV, even though there is prevention from mother to child transmission measures that are put in place, but other pivoting where people don't go to the clinic, you name it, and so forth. So such things also come into play when it comes to the implications of in the environments in which people grow and become. I mean, if ever I can and draw down and summarize, when in instances when we use health as an entrance towards finding people, we use settlements such as your Begezela as catchment areas to try and go and find if ever there is any cases of HIV, because of there is that nuances and perceptions around people pivoting unprotected sex, a lot of gender-based violence cases, lack of service delivery, allowing a ripple effect of a lot of social ills happening. So we are saying that at a childhood level and also at an adult level, in order for people professionally, and if ever I could tilt to the most easiest, maybe a theory that is there in many academic fields, Maslow's hierarchy of needs has those templates that people need to have their physiological needs, met. People need to be living in an environment that is very well and that is very taken care of. That's why it's a right. The right to water, the right to health care, those are rights. You look at many things that influence how people grow, if ever they are supported by the environment in which they are. Thank you so much.
It's interesting how you mentioned that it's important that a child or people are raised and are living in livable spaces. And post 1994, that was one of the biggest goals that the government had when they released the white paper, that urban planning would tackle creating livable spaces and neighborhoods for people to have access to healthcare, have access to schools, have access to any essential amenity. And it's interesting to see that how poverty is so complex that it's connected to so many other components that trigger and make life so much difficult for those residing within these spaces. So would you say then that the formation of the white paper or the housing policy was never then a successful policy, or it was successful to a certain degree until it stopped being successful?
That's a good question, especially when it comes to policy level or things that are written that ought to be implemented. I mean, white policies, we are stepping towards the right direction, especially if we are going to be arguing how service ought to be delivered. But what I'm trying to say is that we live in a contemporary world where things are changing, where we're going to have to be abreast with what the reality is when it comes to service requirements of our people in South Africa, if ever we'll be having patriots writing these papers, right? My chat rather is, if ever at a government level we're going to be writing white papers, are we assembling or building capabilities? What I'm trying to say is that if ever we are assembling capabilities for people to be living a better life through coming up with a white paper, what does it mean? What are the implications of that white paper? That way, white paper means that, are there going to be any programs? Are there going to be any campaigns or anything? Are those people that are going to be doing that better capacitated? Are they going to be well trained? That is my chat as to, are you assembling new capabilities through white papers to come and find use of, or make use of strategies to come and help people? That's why you are coming with a white paper. And also my chat is, are you building new capabilities? Are you finding or creating, if ever we're going to constantly come with policies or white papers that are going to be saying we're addressing this in this particular way, but there are a lot of unintended consequences that are coming today, like your
Yeah.
nuances in lack of good service delivery, a lot of red tapes, then it means that we are not definitely building new capabilities, but trying to still assemble, by using making papers and having the same people, or rather maybe the same method or approaches to service delivery, it being only administrative, reading, but not actually walking the talk. Why are we talking and talking and talking through papers, through academic narratives, through discourses, through researches, but then only few people are walking that talk at an implementation level? Who's implementing these white papers? Which programs are implementing these white papers? And what service deliveries are evident when we're looking at what the white paper was trying to implement? And what are the unintended consequences, things that we didn't look at, that we are seeing that are coming even though we came with the white paper? That is my argument. So I can say that maybe these papers should be relooked once in a while, if ever they review them once in 10 years, or I don't know, with bearing in mind that we are living in contemporary times. I mean, for you as a town planner, now how settlements are looking like, let's make use of Soweto southwestern townships and how it was constructed with intention to be like that. The question today should be around the lines of, how do we try to decentralize them? Are we going to be, assembling capabilities? Are we going to be building people houses? Or are we going to be building new capabilities by finding ways, by, collaborating with people on the ground on how to do the work? It means that we are taking multiple approaches when it comes to service delivery. So I'm saying that, white papers, yes, it's fine. We can write them. We can, try and be as nice and as we sound. I mean, we spoke before how the Constitution of South Africa at a global level, it said it's coming with eminence. Our papers can also come with eminence, but the implementation of these papers that we are writing at a higher level, how is it happening? You name it. Are they being implemented the same way? Are there any nuances? Are there any challenges? Are there any monitoring and evaluations that we can pinpoint? That when we come back to, we remember we wrote a 2030 vision. Oh, remember we wrote a white paper that addresses this specific issue. Is it being implemented in that particular way? Can't we have a higher body that will be seeing this? Can't we have recommendations that, remember we spoke about this, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we haven't done them? So my chat around white papers is that they will be there, they will become bills, they will become signed, but the implementation side of it, we need to see it. We need to see the process. We are tired of the processes of saying this will happen, this will happen, but the outcomes, where are they? So white papers, yes, definitely, that is a good way of maybe communicating policy, but let us see what these white papers are saying at grassroots level. The same way there's going to be students who compile your honors researches, your master's researches. Why are they only remaining at vets wired spaces? If ever you wrote your research around a particular place or environment, why is it some of the recommendations that you give not being implemented or not being recognized or reviewed? Why then are we doing these researches that are going to be only be kept in institutional libraries, and we don't see them when they go back? So I'll keep on coming back to saying that, can't we bridge the gap between the service user and the service provider? The service provider being the people who are at the government, who are writing these white papers. But now the service user being you and I, the normal South African, excuse me, are we finding, what these for lack of a better word, people are saying that they're going to be giving us, or as per our rights, as per our constitutional rights, are we receiving this in this particular way based on the right, the freedom to expression? If I can express myself, then I must be able to question if ever that policy is coming into power and it's logical, and if ever there are not any other unintended consequences. So I will pause there. Thank you so much.
I love your answer so much because it speaks to the topic. Because I think when I was coming up with this topic about how urban planning has been stagnant in driving transformation and innovation, it speaks to how we have these great policies, but we continuously continue using the same methods that are clearly not working for us. And you mentioned something about that we're living in new times, meaning that times have changed. And if you look at it, 1994 was about 30 years ago, 29 years ago, and we're still using the same methods that we used then. And it's very frustrating for South Africans right now, and I think for our generation right now, to be using the same methods that we see that were not as progressive as we thought they would be, right? And I think the most important thing is for us to find new ways of doing things. Yes, the policies can remain, but I believe there's new ways on which these policies can be tackled to have a better outcome. And that's why I think it's important that with every project, it's important to do an evaluation aspect to get from the people that were receiving these services what they think could be done better. And you mentioned something very profound about research, about the research that students produce, that why isn't this research released to the public? Why is it only limited to the vets community? Why can't other people use the same research that you did to actually empower those spaces? And I think that's very profound. So with that, and with you speaking about how times have changed, how do you then envision spaces like Begazela in the next 10 years? What type of innovation do you want to see, especially being someone who has an NGO that speaks to innovation and speaks to new technology and new thinking outside of what we know?
That is a good question for a director. I think, when it comes to progress, I'm gonna also be tilting towards the political side. The elections are coming. There is that aha moment that needs to come, that needs to happen because of this change in the paradigm of politics. There is emerging themes that we're going to be witnessing a different view of what politics look like, especially when you look at the dominating party or various parties in different municipalities or different provinces. This is where we're going to be now seeing service delivery coming from. I mean, these places in which, such as Begezela, they are, in as much as they're not recognized, it is under a certain jurisdiction place, which is now a good entrance because if ever Begezela is under a certain ward, then if ever that ward chose and participated for it to have a councillor, then it means the councillor becomes a good entrance point for us to constantly remind that, remember, you are representing people who are under your region or under your secular, kind of a proximity, that there's certain service delivery issues or challenges that come with it. I mean, there's a lot of wards. Some of the wards are in different places and settlements. I think there is wards in more suburban places where the councillors there don't have necessarily the issues of the councillors at City of Johannesburg, who would be having settlements under their jurisdiction and under their they're supposed to act as stewards towards those people. So I'm assuming that in the upcoming level, when it comes to service delivery, especially for such social injustices that are at big is happening, there is that there should be a readiness that comes with the housing part, and the housing issue in Johannesburg is going to be an issue for the uh, uh, for donkey years, for lack of a better word, because of if ever there's a huge backlog and there is still people who are still not registered on the system, that needs to be having these houses that the government has constantly been setting targets and allocating money, taxpayers' monies, by the way, towards such initiatives. Then how do we then, challenge head on the issue of that backlog? We cannot constantly be having issues where almost all the time, because of, you look at such challenges of settlements such as Begezela. It is easier, one thing that you could find, that some of the children that are on the streets with people begging, you'll realize when you actually make your way to Gold Reef City, there's a few robots there where this, and it's so a social injustice that is happening there. There's mothers begging with children there. So by right, at a social protection level, as a social worker, that is very right. That is, you are contravening, or rather, you're not supposed to be doing that to a child. You are violating a children's right. And remember, in South Africa, a child is a state property. They have rights. You are supposed to be taken care of. You're not supposed to be at streets at 12 o'clock if ever they're 6 years of age. They're supposed to be in a kindergarten or at a school. So when you find out the biographies, or the demographics rather, of where are these people coming from, you find them coming from these settlements. And these settlements, like we've said, that they are unstructured, or rather they are faced with a lot of issues of service delivery. So let there be great memorandums, or let there be great policies, or whatever ways in which that's going to be solved, especially that is going to be highlighted in the upcoming new era, because South Africa will be having a national election, meaning that there are likely to be changes in strategy in how service will be delivered in the next 4 years, right? And what the implications are that for places such as the city of Johannesburg. So I think I'm only be like, looking forward to be seeing that people could be removed there, but also now at a realistic level, how soon could that be? And will the people that are staying there have their, to some extent, immediate rights issues being addressed immediately, like having access to running water, having access to, electricity, the children there having access to a kindergarten that is around, that is going to be developing them. I do not think that I would like to say that I want to see any digital transformation happening there, because of there is a red tape in service delivery. There is something that needs to be addressed, that is pressing, which are physiological aspects of a human being. Before a human being can self-actualize and actually have a self-esteem, they need to be in an environment that, allows them and perpetuates them to be. I mean, the most normal statement that we know, that when you feel good, you do good, or you name it. It's very complex when it comes to the human being. So I do not anticipate to see anything that is digital. I do not anticipate to see anything that is radical as yet, but I'm expecting and anticipating to see something that is relating to the physiological level of a human being, the security side of a human being, to make sure that they are well equipped to be able to influence that full potential life that almost everyone in South Africa is trying to live. So I'm looking forward to that after next year, or even going forward. There should be that addressing of service issues. I'm hoping that the people at Begezela, in their running of there is an argument, or rather, this at a factual level might be happening, but also not, not narrated formally. But there is an aspect that Begezela might be going through, or rather, let me use the term allegedly. Begezela is going through the courts because of there is a form of a corporation or a collective that is trying to have them be removed there and use that spaces, probably, for business sakes. So what is it that is it going to be meaning for the people that are staying there, the children that are staying there, some of the people that aren't even, there's a lot of community of people that are unhoused in South Africa, and there's a community of people that is emerging from homelessness. That's why it's becoming a scourge. The scourge of homelessness in South Africa is becoming more. It's because of now people are becoming more resilient of staying in the streets because of such places such as Begezela. At the most times, they become taken. People now start buying them and starting businesses there, and people find themselves in the loose. So what at a sustainable level I'll be looking forward is probably maybe the implementation of better policies when it comes to that. Better people that are equipped to understand that they are patriots. The work that they're doing, they should know that is informed by rights-based services more than us coming and giving a hand to people. Like I'll tell back to my example that I made earlier, that what if the people at Alexander don't necessarily, want houses? What if they want skills so that they can go and work in Sandton as well, and they could come back and build themselves houses? So it is that issue that the backlog or the red tape should be something that is being looked at also at a strategic level, also how they can tackle it. I mean, there's, Johannesburg Social Housing Corporation or some form of a collective that is supposed to be trying by all means to be giving, or helping with the housing issue. If ever we're going to be looking at them helping, people that are on the ground and experiencing homelessness, then we should look at, are they capability, do they at a capable level, are they capable to do so, do they have the right staff, do they have the right people who can understand how these policies should be implemented in helping people, how do we strategize when it comes to finances, how do we then, there should be that strategic aspect when it comes to saying that there is a backlog issue, a red tape issue when it comes to Johannesburg and the housing and settlement issues. But now there's a strategic way in which we are addressing this backlog, more than just allocating budget all the time. But yet these settlements keep on increasing in Johannesburg. I'll pause there. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your answer, and it's given us insight on what we should expect in the next years. Unfortunately, we ran out of time, and I wish we could really continue this conversation because you've given us insight on so many aspects that we never actually thought about. And like now, I'm actually starting to think about like the connection between an urban planner and a social worker because I see that they're really interlinked. And at the end of the day, it seems like we all just want to achieve the same goal. So I'd just like to say thank you, Bradley, for agreeing to be on my podcast. Also, thank you to my lecturer and my classmates. And Bradley, feel free to say anything.
No, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this, this conversation. I mean, it takes a view or an approach that there is a multidisciplinarity when it comes to, professions. We shouldn't be treating our professions as silos, but rather as trying to find, like I've said the word, the nuances as to how we can relate to one another, how the issues in urban planning have an implication when it comes to your social living. How is the approach when it comes to my profession, the psychosocial view of people at a biological level, access to your hospitals, at a social level, the people in which you stay with, and at a psychological level, is the environment warranting you to be, your full self? And that is one thing that I'm also taking away from what you've just said now, that there is those interrelations when it comes to relating professionally. So I think these are the conversations that actually need to go forward, but not only need to remain in papers that have been written that, oh, there was students like this who were arguing about this, but it only remains in the archives of an institution because of it is the only well of such narratives that will change the world. Or it might not be today, it might be tomorrow, but I mean, there is that saying that wise people, I think there's a reason as to why we are doing these professions to some extent, or to spark change in people's lives through urban planners, making sure that people are well catered for when it comes to spaces in which they live in. I've also read few of the narrative from an urban perspective, that the argument is the maps that you guys do, or rather the implementation of service that you guys do, also is centered around, are the places having recreational facilities, are there going to be
Yeah.
hospitals there, are there going to be schools? When I come at a social work perspective, I look at that at a system perspective, that are the people who are staying in this environment having these four things, or having these five things that are propelling them to be, the people that are ought to be, because of it's enshrined in the Constitution of South Africa. It's enshrined in policies such as the Batopili principles, that the people shall share in the wealth of the country. The people shall be treated with courtesy where they are. You must be able to go register and say that I don't have a house. It shouldn't be taking 10 years. People shouldn't be dying while waiting. That's a social injustice. So I'd like to pause there and thank you enough for inviting me to make contributions to such conversations that look at key role players, for either from an academic perspective, either at an implementing perspective, either from people on the grounds who don't have the capability or have the means to have this conversation with us, the people that are at Begezela, who still are under the illiteracy era, because of you name it, and they cannot come and put language to how they are feeling or what they're experiencing to such spaces. But us who to some extent have access to these to institutions of higher learning, can learn this and can be able to package our professions into a multidisciplinary way of trying to help the society at large. And this is how we're doing it. So I'd like to pause there and thank you so much for inviting me. And I hope that we will all come to play, especially when it comes to serving the people of our land. Thank you so much.
Thank you once again, Bradley, for your time. And to the viewers at home, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and tune in for the next episode. Thank you, Bradley. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.